Welcome to Bungalows for Bachelors. We are going to learn something about trusses here because trusses allow us to save money and potentially make our job easier for building something. Well, what is a truss? A truss, usually, in our case of a roof truss, it's designed to be the roof and ceiling put together in such a way to span two walls would look something like this. Oh, I don't know what I did. Weird. That would be the roof truss right there. Is the part that sits on the walls, attaches with the roof and ceiling, creates that. Now you can order these pre-made from a truss manufacturer. They are assembled with stamped metal plates at all of the joints that have a bunch of spikes that embed themselves in the wood. Each connection has those plates, and they're all usually built out of 2x4s. And they are quick and easy to install. You got to get some heavy, like a crane of some kind, to pick them up and set them up on the top of the roof, but they're fairly easy to stand up and install, and you're pretty much roof and ceiling is good to go after that point. What I'm going to refer to is not that. I'm going to be referring to what I call hand-built trusses, where we're building a house and there's a certain specific section with just a particular design that I've decided that, or we've decided that there's a part of it that if we do this one little trick, we don't have to worry about supporting the roof in a certain way or anything like that. We can avoid adding beams and save some money on the beams and labor for the beams. So that is something to keep in mind. So if we are going to make a truss, well, the first thing we want to ask is, well, why do we make a truss? Well, if we have a house with two walls and a roof like this, each connection is essentially a pin. It can rotate because it's not really secured in a way that's going to prevent it from rotating with enough force applied. So the weight of the house is coming down. What that's going to do is it's going to make the walls want to move outward. That's called thrust. I'm going to call that wall thrust for the purposes of my description here. So what that'll do is in a longer amount of time, eventually what you're going to get is something that, like, if it were to fail and collapse, it would do this, right? Your walls would bow outward, the roof would come down, everybody would be having a bad day. We don't want that. So we would avoid that by tying the walls together across. If this member here can resist that thrust, then we're good to go. Now, the important thing is that when we connect these things, the part we're trying to build is the truss. We're trying to build this triangle. We don't really care about the walls. We're basically trying to build this triangle thing so that when we set it on the walls, or that, we may set the rafters and the ceiling joists on the walls at two separate times, but we know that we connect it in a way that the ceilings connect to the rafters the right way, because that's the important connection. I'm not really concerned with how the ceiling is connected to the wall. That's less important for the truss purpose. So something we'll pay attention to. But if we have that scenario where we have the two walls and the ceiling, two walls, the ceiling, and the rafters, then we've successfully tied this together. Now, what's the next drawback to this is that, well, the bottom member, the ceiling joist, is, if we're trying to span all the way across this and we use a 2x6, it'll be too bendy. We couldn't use a 2x6 because it's not rated for that far of a span. So what we got to do is one of two things: either we support it or we make it bigger. Well, if we made it a 2x12 instead, some nice big chunky member, that would work. But the problem with that is that these 2x12s that this long and this many of them, because you got to do this for every rafter in your area that you're doing this trick, that gets expensive, which defeats the whole point, because the point was to try to avoid costs, and beams are expensive. So we don't want to do the 2x12 thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep the 2x6 trick, but we're going to support it in the center. How would we do that? Well, we can't go below us because that's the ceiling, that's drywall. We don't want to do anything there. So we're going to go above us. We're going to hold it up. So that's going to be another board member we put in, a 2x4, whatever we choose. And that is going to be in tension. It's going to be, that piece is going to be, oops, wrong arrow. That piece is going to be in tension. Those are arrows. Because it's going to be picking up the weight of the ceiling, so that now the ceiling joist of the 2x6 is really only spanning from here to here. And that's a very short span for the ceiling joist. It's rated for that. There's no problems. So we don't actually have sag there like that. It's nice and straight. So we fixed the ceiling. But now what did we do? Well, we took that weight and we transferred it back up to the top of the truss, right? So now the top of the truss is holding that weight. What that's going to do is that's going to put the rafters in more compression, and what that's going to potentially have is some kind of potential buckling issue. So we're going to combine this compression from our connection we just made with the weight of the roof that's already there, and this is all stressing that rafter member, and we don't want to overstress the rafter member. So what we're going to do is we're going to support it mid-span and make it, we're not going to worry about the gravity load as much here. So we're going to add a member here and here. So now we're not worried about the rafter member so much because it's got support right in the middle. And that's going to take that support, and that support's going to be the new member we just drew here is going to be in compression, not in tension, because it's going to be squished. If you were to push down on this board, it's going to push down on that guy. So it's going to squish that guy and put it in compression. What that's going to do to the bottom joint here is it's going to add more weight going down because it's going to have compression from this direction and this direction. It's going to push down. Well, what's going to happen here? I'll tell you what's going to happen here. This guy is going to resist that compression downward. He's going to resist this dude by pulling up harder. Well, what's that going to do? That's going to put more weight at the top, which is going to compress this guy more, which is going to compress this guy more, which is going to add more tension to this guy, which is going to add more weight to the top, which is going to compress this guy more, which is going to compress this guy more. You see what's happening here, right? This is a cycle. Now, what I'm not concerned about is the fact that it's an infinite cycle because it's a diminishing return thing. If I were to do this math and run these numbers, the change in number would get smaller and smaller and smaller every time. And eventually, I would approach an effective final answer that I know is like, oh, okay, that's just how much it's being stressed. Here are the forces, nothing crazy here. Now, we're not going to necessarily have to do that math unless we have a special circumstance, but it's important to know that this is happening and that we need to beef up the whole system in order to make this kind of a trick work. So that is a hand built truss. We're going to use that in situations where we're trying to clear open spaces and use smaller boards and nails connected in the right way with our brains. And we're going to know that we can build something that is less expensive and just as strong, if not stronger. So that's the basic idea. If we were to have, let's say, a 6 foot hallway or something like that, and we were going to do that, we're going to build one of these every ceiling joist and every rafter. We're going to connect them all the right way so that we get that result going all the way down. We're going to repeat this pattern. That way we are not installing a beam anywhere in there. We're holding up the weight every time we have a rafter. It's self-sufficient. There's no roof, there's no wall thrust anywhere down this wall. It's all safe. So that's why we're going to do it. And that's an important tool to use. And it usually only works in a few certain places. Got to be very careful how you use it. You really don't want to scale it up too big, but that's the way to go sometimes. So that's another tool in our toolbox.